Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to look at the two different types of AMIs that you can launch. So we've got EBS, which we covered off in the last lecture, and then we've also got Instant Store. And this does actually come up in the exam. I did the exam just a few days ago, and you are definitely quizzed on this. So you need to understand the difference between EBS and Instant Store. So when you go and select your AMI, and we're going to do this very shortly, you can basically select your AMI based on a number of different factors. So you can select it on regions, you can select it on the operating system, you can select it on the architecture, so this could be 32-bit or 64-bit, you can select it based on launch permissions, and then finally you can also select it based on the storage for the root device, or otherwise known as the root device volume. And you get two different options here. You get Instant Store, which is sometimes referred to as ephemeral storage, and then you have an EBS back volume. And we've been using EBS back volumes throughout the whole of this course so far. In this lecture, what we're going to do is we're going to go and launch an AMI using Instant Store, as well as one using EBS back volumes, and we're going to look at the differences. Before we do that, though, I just want to let you know that all AMIs are categorized as either backed by EBS or backed by Instant Store, so it's one or the other. So for EBS volumes, the root device for an instance launch from the AMI is an Amazon EBS volume created from an EBS snapshot. For Instant Store volumes, however, the root device, so the root device volume is basically where the operating system is installed. So the root device volume is created from a template that's actually stored in S3. So they are quite different. So let's log into the AWS console and have a look. Okay, so here I am in the AWS console. If I go over to services, again, we're going to go over to EC2 compute, and we're going to launch two different instances, and we'll go through it very, very quickly. So first one, we're just going to do it as standard. So we're going to do our Amazon Linux 2 AMI. We're going to leave everything as default. Again, everything as default. I'm not going to add any tags. I'm going to use my existing security group, WebDMZ, and I'm going to go ahead and hit launch, and I'm going to acknowledge that I've got my key pair. So there we go. We've launched our Amazon Linux AMI, and that is now in a pending state to be launched. Let's go launch a second instance, but instead of going through and choosing Amazon Linux 2 AMI, let's go over to our community AMIs. And in here, we can sort by operating system, we can sort by architecture, and we can sort by the root device type, and we can select Instant Store. So I'm going to go ahead and launch an Instant Store one. I'm just going to use the default one at the top. You can pick any one that you want. Now notice that because I am launching an Instant Store, it restricts the number of instance types that I can choose. And basically the smallest one I can choose is a M3 medium. So I'm going to go in and choose that. You don't have to do this if you want to not come out of free tier. You can just watch what I do on my screen. I'm going to leave everything else as default. In here, notice the volume type is Instant Store. And if you read up here, it says your instance will be launched with the following storage device settings. You can attach additional Instant Store volumes to your instance. You can also attach additional EBS volumes after launching an instance, but not Instant Store volumes. So if we do want additional Instant Store volumes, we have to do it here. We can't go on and add additional ones later. I'm going to leave this as default. So I'm just going to leave everything here as default, and I'm going to go in and add my tags. I'm not going to do any tags. I'm going to use an existing security group. I'm going to use my WebDMZ, and I'm going to go ahead and review and launch. And I'm going to go ahead and launch that. So now we're going to have two EC2 instances, one with an Instant Store and then one with normal EBS backed. And the way we can tell the difference between them is the size. So my T2 Micro is EBS backed, and that's in US East 1B. My M3 Medium, that's in US East 1C, and that is going to be Instant Store backed. So I'm just going to pause the video and wait for this to come back up online. Okay, so that is now available. So if we go over to volumes, we'll be able to see just one volume. So we can't even see our Instant Store volume here. We can only see our EBS backed volume. And you'll notice if we go in here, actually, let's go back over to our instances. And if we go and click on here, we're able to go to Actions, Instance State, and hit Stop. And we can go ahead and stop this instance. And if we stop this instance, all the data on our EBS-backed volume will persist. So it's persistent storage. But if I click up here and I go over to my Actions and go to my Instance States, all I can do is reboot this instance or terminate it. I cannot stop it at all. And that's because it's Instant Store backed. Now you might be wondering, well, what does that mean? Well, if we go over to our status checks here, and if you remember that we have two different status checks, we've got our system status checks and our instance status checks. Let's say we've got an instance store volume, and this is sitting on top of a hypervisor, and our hypervisor starts to fail. Our system status check will start to say something like impaired. And what you would normally do with EBS is you would basically go and stop that EC2 instance, and then you would start it again. And when it starts, it will load up on another hypervisor. So you can, stop your instances from, having issues with the underlying hypervisor simply by stopping them and starting them again, and they'll start up on another hypervisor. You can't do that with an instance store volume. So if this underlying hypervisor does have any type of issue, and for some reason completely stops, that's it. You're going to lose all the data on your instance store volume. And for that reason, it's called ephemeral storage. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and terminate this instance because it is costing me money. It's not within free tier. And I'm going to terminate it in there. Like I said, you can't actually see it in volumes because it's not an elastic block store or an EBS volume. It's an instance store volume. So onto my exam tips. So we learned that instance store volumes are sometimes called ephemeral storage. So the reason for that is if for some reason they're stopped, you're going to lose all of your data. Instance store volumes cannot be stopped. If the underlying host fails, then you're going to lose your data. So that's all I mean is if for some reason it stops, if for some reason the underlying host fails, you are going to lose all your data on your virtual hard disk drives. With EBS-backed instances, they can be stopped, and you're not going to lose the data on that instance if it is stopped. And you can reboot both, and you're not going to lose any of your data. It's basically only if the host fails and that EC2 instance stops and it's instance store, then you will lose your data. And then by default, both root volumes will be deleted on termination. However, with EBS volumes, you can always tell AWS to keep the root device volumes. You can't do that with instance store. So that is it for this lecture, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture where we're going to look at encryption with EBS.